All right, well, thanks for coming. I'm Fran Fabrizio, and this talk is Scaffolding for a Growing Team. I am the IT director at a place called the Minnesota Population Center, which is part of the University of Minnesota. And before I start, I want to do a little bit of an audience survey. How many of you were here last year at my Rebooting the Team talk? Okay, a good amount of you. Okay, so this is not a follow-up, so if you weren't there, no worries. But if you were there, you'll see some themes that have carried over from that talk. How many of you are some form of supervisor or manager? Okay, and how many of you are sort of the top level IT manager in your organization? Okay, and then I'm assuming everybody else is then an individual contributor. How many of you are on a team of about a dozen or so, or smaller? A dozen or smaller? And then how many of you are bigger than that, just so I can get a sense? So for those of you who are in the smaller teams, are you in a period of growth right now? So if you're on a small team and you're growing and you're getting close to this sort of dozen number. So that's where we're at right now, and that's where I'm coming from, where we've gone through in the last year. So that's sort of my perspective, but I'm hoping it's going to be a little bit more universally and generally applicable. So let me start with a brief introduction to the MPC. I'll try to do it in 60 seconds, just so you have the context of who we are. So we're a very large research center at the university. We're about 200 people at the moment. And our mission in life is to curate and distribute what have become the world's largest databases for census and demographic data. And our primary consumers of that data are about 50,000 or so academic researchers, policymakers, nonprofits, and others, and it's a pretty global reach, so it's pretty internationally focused. Our sort of particular value add, or our passion in all of this, is to take all of these disparate data sources and harmonize them across a few different dimensions. So we want to harmonize them across time, across geography, across each other, so that we can make them comparable across these data sets and even across data types. And we want to do this in a way by providing a suite of tools to allow these researchers and our other customers to come and find the data that they want, combine it in ways that has traditionally been hard to do, and extract out the data of interest to them so they can get to asking their research question faster and easier. So just one example of how someone might use our tool is to combine census or survey data with political boundaries, and including changes over time of those boundaries, and then overlay on top of that maybe some environmental data that we get from satellite imagery data sets to try to study something like the effects of climate change in a particular area or on a particular population over time. And that's actually a very hard thing to do for a lot of researchers because the data is in many different formats coming from many different sources, and we're trying to be a place where they can come and have a tool set to allow them to harmonize those things and combine those things and learn how to compare those across those boundaries. So that's what we do, and if that sounds interesting to you, you can go out to our website. The URL there is at the bottom, pop.umn.edu, and learn more. But I'm here to talk about sort of the staff itself and some changes we've gone through over the past 12 months, basically picking up from this time last year. And so we've experienced growth quite rapidly over the last 12 months, probably the fastest rate of growth we've ever had. I think we've added something like 50 people to the organization this year, and we're 200. So that's a lot of growth. It's been even more impactful within IT. We've just about doubled our size from 11 to 20 in the last 12 months. And we're now, as an organization, the largest we've ever been, and we're about a 25-year-old organization. And this is the first time we've ever not fit under one roof, so now we're expanding into two other offices that are not co-located. And that's creating a lot of pressure and challenges around how we communicate and how we organize our work and how we collaborate. And I know that some of you are coming from teams that are globally dispersed, so this sounds like no big deal, but for us, we're a very small, close-knit family. Even to have to walk a couple of blocks and talk to people to have a meeting is a big change for us. So it's been a lot of growth over the last year. And does anybody know what this is a picture of? Anybody have any guesses?
Mississippi River Delta?
Exactly. This is the Mississippi River Delta from space. And I kind of view this as an apt metaphor for kind of how we felt about the last year. So for a really long time, the MPC was this sort of singular force, all moving in the same direction, all with the same exact goal, with absolutely no confusion about what our direction or priorities were. And it feels like in the last, starting a couple of years ago, but especially in the last year, we've kind of gotten down into the delta now. And all of a sudden, the amount of projects that we have to worry about and the number of different things demanding our attention has sort of fractaled out. And we're getting very split in terms of what directions we need to be going in, and having to pursue 5 of those at once, and what should be the priority, and having to find a lot of balance. And it's sort of, I'm thinking of myself in a boat as I'm coming down the Mississippi River, and then all of a sudden I get down into this area, and it's like, which way do I go, and how do I know what my priorities should be? So maybe a more humorous way to illustrate this is with road signs. But definitely we've been having a lot of feelings of unclear priorities and unclear direction over the last year. So that sort of sets the stage for what I want to talk about today, and this idea that we've arrived at an inflection point. And there's lots of literature out there on how to scale and grow teams, and one common thread is that there's always this inflection point. Some people pin it at 10 people, some people pin it at a dozen, but sort of when you get up into that space where all the things that were working really well for you all of a sudden stop working really well for you. And we saw the same exact thing. So as we crossed that threshold, all of a sudden we were having issues with miscommunication, which was never really a challenge for us when we were a smaller team, and finding that messages weren't propagating the way that we had expected them to or had assumed they were. Another issue that started to hit us is the need to have specialists to attack specific problems, whereas we and most small teams generally start out as a group of generalists, and everybody kind of pitches in every part of the stack. We hit this point, and it happened very rapidly, where all of a sudden we had a bunch of problems in front of us that really required very deep domain knowledge in very specific areas of technology, and we weren't really equipped for that. From where I was sitting as director and having to report to my management sort of more holistically what our status was and how things were going with our projects, we didn't have the right infrastructure in place in terms of work planning or work tracking for me to ask those, like, the how are we doing question consistently across our projects. It was a lot of manual legwork, going to each project and sorting through how they did things, how they tracked things, and trying to piece together a story to know where we needed to turn our attention, where we needed more resources. And that was a really big challenge for me, and every new project that came along just made that worse. So I'm stretched very thin at this point, and we had traditionally been organized in project teams, very sort of siloed. We get a project, we build a team, they run with it. 4 or 5 years later, we get another big grant, another project, they run with it. And we knew we wanted to break that apart, and it seemed like as we were growing, we were just strengthening those boundaries. So that's sort of the environment that we had at this point when we were crossing this inflection point. And so today I'll talk about kind of how we reacted to that. What did we refactor? What scaffolding did we find we needed to put in place to give us some hooks to allow us to do that scale out that we needed to do in a much more planful way than it was happening at the time. If you're thinking back, for those of you who were at my talk last year, that was very much focused on the team at an individual level. And we spent a year kind of looking at every person's role on the team and how they plugged in and how they fit in the organization. This was much more a year spent looking at the macro level. And how do we prep this entire system, this entire organization to be ready for scale? And so it was a much different kind of flavor to the year. And so I'll talk through that. And then really what I just want you to walk away with today is some mix of all the hard-earned wisdom that we've gathered this year, so maybe you can avoid stepping in a pothole or two. And there will be some specific tools and techniques and tips that you might be able to also translate back into your own organization. So a little bit of a mix of the practical and the like I said, sort of more general wisdom. So we found ourselves at the inflection point, and we knew we needed to make some changes, and so we set out with some high-level goals. the first of which is somebody to help me spread the management load around. That was first and foremost in my mind, to keep my life sane. We wanted to have clear reviews of our overall work obligations and priorities and know where we needed to go and what was most important to be working on. Those project-specific planning and tracking conventions, we wanted to kind of deconstruct those and see if we could construct mechanisms that were more consistent across our projects. And so we spent a lot of time working on that. And something that was really important is making sure that as we grew from 10, 11 to 20, that people weren't falling through the cracks, that everybody was still getting taken care of and shepherded along in their career and getting the supervision that they needed. And it was very clear that traditionally I was providing most of that for most of the team, and that was no longer going to be possible. So we needed to refactor that. So I'll break the talk into two parts. The first part will be more about structuring the people and positioning the people for growth. The second part will be more, I call it upgrading your radar, but basically just the tools and techniques to get a better handle on where you've been, where you're at, and where you're going. And it's sequential in the talk just for organizational purposes, but really this all happened in lockstep throughout the year at the same time. Really early on, we established some core values of kind of what we didn't want to lose sight of as we were going through this process. And I just thought it would be good to quickly go through those so you can kind of see what our philosophy was as we went through it. So at the MPC, every organization says this, that work-life balance and taking care of the individual, and we really do live and breathe that. And we think it's a big competitive advantage for us. When we're recruiting and attracting people and retaining people to come work with us. And when we were a really small team, it was really, really easy to do sort of customized, individualized things that really played up, a particular individual's strengths or goals. And there was really not a whole lot of organizational process that would restrict that. So you really could carve out kind of your ideal job scenario. And we knew that as we scaled, we were going to have to introduce process, and we knew that introducing process was going to create a little friction and constrain just sort of how independent everybody could be. And so we had this sense of maintaining a balance between creating a rewarding environment for the individual, but ultimately being accountable to our organization. And you'll see as we made decisions about what we wanted to do that was really sort of foremost in our mind. This next one, I think all of my supervisors probably would love it if I stopped saying this phrase, but data-driven decision-making, I've said it at least 1,000 times in the last year. I really wanted to make sure that we were getting the data we needed to make smart decisions. It was too often that we felt like we were making a guess or flying blind because our systems weren't feeding us the kinds of data we needed to make evidence-based decisions. So that was a big core value. A lot of the things we touched on, I don't know if I'd attach the word sensitive to them or controversial, but it was a lot of change to be throwing at developers, and we wanted to make sure that we were over-communicating as all of that went on and sharing widely the rationale for why we were doing these things and being very transparent about it. And so that was a core principle. And then this last one, process. So process is not evil. And process has a bad reputation as a word, right? Especially on a small team that's been in startup mode and they're used to just sort of figuring out as they go and not having a lot in the way of pivoting. And then all of a sudden you come in with process, and there's often a recoil or a backlash to that. Process isn't evil, bad process is, right? And I wanted to make that distinction, and we talked about that a lot this year. So part one, poised for growth. So teams are the building blocks of your organization, and if you're under 10 people, you're probably at one or maybe two teams, but a small number of teams. And then as you cross over into the 15 or 20 people size, well, one or two teams isn't going to cut it. There's tons of research out there that tells you your ideal team size should be, and the numbers vary, but it's always a very small number. I've seen 4 to 7, I've seen 3 to 9, I've seen different values. For us, it feels natural at 3 to 5. So we wanted to try to come up with a structure that would allow us to have building blocks of 3 to 5 people. And how many of you are familiar with Conway's Law? Okay, so Conway's Law says the systems that a team builds or that an organization builds is a reflection of the structure of their team. So meaning, if you want a 3-pass compiler, ask an organization with 3 teams to build it, and they'll naturally figure out how to break that problem into 3 pieces and put interfaces between those 3 pieces. So as you're thinking about how you want to create a team structure that's going to allow you to scale, you really need to have the thing you're trying to build right in the front of your mind so that you can reflect that in your team structure. It'll certainly reduce the friction to getting where you want to be on the product side if your team is built as a reflection of that as much as possible. And one of the things we really struggled with was whether we wanted functional teams or cross-functional teams, and I think those terms are a little bit blurred at this point, but a lot of momentum around cross-functional teams being the right way to do it because it reduces the dependencies on anything external to getting your problem solved, and there's certainly a lot of validity to that. At the same time, cross-functional teams can also encourage siloing. And if siloing is what you want, if that aligns with your product vision, then that's the way to go. But as you'll see in our case, that's not quite what we wanted. And we'll talk about that in a few slides. So this concept of team of teams. So it took us too long to recognize during this transition that we went from having a primary problem of just building the thing or making the thing to organizing the people making the thing. And that might sound a little odd or maybe just common sense, but what it really means is in a lot of small teams, management is an add-on. You've got a bunch of developers and then some of them kind of pick up management duties because somebody had to do it and they were around and it's a small part of their job. And really, this inflection point was when we had to get serious about management. We had to make, as I say here, management a first-class citizen right alongside of developer and think about getting people the right management skill set and putting that first and foremost rather than it being a bolt-on to their job. So of those managers in the room, how many of you started out as a developer and became sort of a quote-unquote accidental manager? Right? It's a pretty common career path for us. And that's okay, and that still works, but you have to make sure that once somebody's crossed that threshold, that you're then supporting them with the management skills and training and support that they need. So this idea of cultivating your management capability was something that we worked on a lot this year. And you'll see this advice in a lot of places, this first thing on the slide, but your best developers don't make your best managers often. So in the very rare cases that actually works out, it's great, but it's more often not the case. And so make sure that when you're structuring teams, you're not just taking your best or your most senior or seasoned developer and putting them as the team lead, right? You actually, when you do that, you kind of shoot yourself in both feet and the abdomen because you're not going to get great management out of somebody who's an unwilling manager. You're going to get less of that great code that they were writing because they have less time. And you're probably creating a flight risk, which is the shot in the abdomen, because then you lose that resource altogether and then you're really up a creek. So make sure you're putting the right people in lead roles, and those people may not be internal to your org. It's a little bit, it's really scary to think about taking this small team that's been chugging along so well for a really long time and bringing in an external manager. And you worry about culture and how that's going to derail the whole thing. But sometimes that's the right thing to do if you don't have the people in-house who are at least willing to learn how to be good managers and put that first and foremost. And what changed for me in this process is now I manage managers, which is totally different than what I was doing 12 months ago. And now my thinking is at a much more strategic level. And I've had to really let go of the tactical control that I once had. And that was a little bit hard for me, but recognizing that the team leads now are the ones who own the tactical implementation of our mission, and I'm here to set strategic direction. And that was a new skill set for me that I had to go off and polish up and get better at. We needed some new governance models. So we were pretty much a true democracy. We would get in a room and figure out any major decision we had to figure out. And that's really hard to do when you're 10 or 12 or 15 people. And so we needed some new forms of governance. So we created sort of an IT leads group out of all of those team leads, and that was sort of our representative democracy. And that's good for most of the business that we need to do now, but it really leaves out all those individual contributors who were used to having a say in decisions. And so, another dirty word, committees. We started playing with the idea of, well, what if we put some of these decisions in the hands of a committee as opposed to the IT leads, and we invite some of the individual contributors that are passionate about that topic to work on that committee. And you'll see that we've used that strategy in a couple of places. And that's a really great way to keep those individual contributors feeling like they're still part of the management and leadership and direction of the team without having the title supervisor or manager. And that's worked out well for us. Every once in a while, and I really, really resisted this until I realized that sometimes I just have to do it. I have to play the benevolent dictator card. When you're 20 people, sometimes you just can't move fast enough. Even when you're 6 people on a committee, sometimes you just can't move fast enough to make the decisions that you need to make. And so I say, use this sparingly, but be willing to wield it and spend the entire rest of your time earning up the trust points so that when you do wield the benevolent dictator card, your team knows that you're looking out for their best interests and that you wouldn't be doing it that way unless you absolutely had to. So back to this point of about team structure and getting more people who can do deep dives and be specialists in certain topics. This was a kind of painful transition for us. I mean, our team took, and I'm sure that a lot of your teams are like this too, our devs take a lot of pride in being full stack generalists and being able to work on everything, you know, from the infrastructure and the database all the way up to front-end development. And it's great that we have people that are that adaptable and that flexible, but when your problems start scaling up, you need somebody who can pay a full-time attention to each one of those layers. And so we really had to have a lot of conversations about, okay, for every dev, what was, you know, they can work on the full stack, but what's their true passion? What do they really want to go and deep dive into? And finding homes for all of our devs as our teams split out into more specialized roles. And that was really a very hands-on, one-on-one process, a lot of frank conversations. We had a developer who ultimately decided that he didn't fit in our new model, and he ended up finding another role for him. And that was the right thing for him to do and the right thing for us to do in that case. Not all of your current team members are going to be real happy about losing that full stack generalist approach. But that's where I come back to balance. This is one of those things where it really is time to think about accountability to the organization and what's best for the organization, and do your best to try to fit everybody into a place that they're passionate about, but you can't allow, you know, sort of individual agendas to derail your ability to scale. So that was an interesting and unexpected challenge for us as we built out our new team org. So I'm just going to run through this quickly, just so you can get a fuller picture of what we've changed in the last 12 months. So we used to have a director, me up top here, and then basically 4 fully self-contained cross-functional project teams. That included front-end developers, Rails developers, database folks, basically everything other than the sysadmin, because we partner with a different entity on campus for that. And there was not a lot of incentive or need for those teams to talk to each other. And then we had a few floating specialists here for some user experience design and some sysadmin work. But for the most part, we had 4 teams that were fully functional on their own. And the problem with that, coming back to Conway's Law, is that this is what we wanted to build. We wanted to break apart our UIs from our back-end data and metadata so that others in the community could come in and put their own novel UIs on top of our data. For us, it's the data and metadata that makes us tick. The UIs are just a means to an end, but they're tightly coupled, and this is what we want to build, and we need a team structure that allows us to get closer to this. So what we ended up putting in place is, I guess I would label these functional teams as opposed to cross-functional teams. And I don't know how much stock I put in those labels, but we assembled a web group, and we assembled a data and metadata group, as well as an ops group down here at the bottom. And there is still some concept of project teams, for sure. I mean, we still have accountability to each of the projects that's paying our salary, right? But there's a much stronger connection between Rails developers on, say, our IPMS project and Rails developers on our NHJS project now. And they understand that part of their job is to work across that boundary and find common ground and reduce duplication and find best practices. And there's some structure in place to support and enhance that that the team leads sort of very proactively work on. And so this has helped us get a little bit closer to that product vision that we have. I'm going to run through fairly quickly some of the specific HR processes that we had to refactor this year. One of the biggest surprises for me is how much time hiring and recruitment started taking. It went from something that we did for a couple of months, once or twice a year, generally when somebody left or when we decided we wanted to bring on a dev, and all of a sudden it was 30% of my time every week. And it was just exploded on us in the winter, and so we needed to refactor that. And traditionally, I chaired every search, and that wasn't going to work anymore. So we sat down with my IT leads and put together a guide, a pretty thorough guide, like 25 or so pages worth of this is how we want to run a search. It was all in my head, and everybody else had ideas that were in their heads, and that kind of happened by convention. We put it down on paper. Well, why did we do that? So that we could then hand that to, say, an individual contributor on our team and say, you're up, you're chairing the next search for a Rails dev. And what's great about that is that it's another way to get our more junior members of the team and our individual contributors involved in managing the team without being a supervisor or manager. When we were smaller, everybody participated in the search. You know, every candidate met every dev for a long period of time until we just got too big to do it. So now we at least get to spread around the love of running searches and hires, and it's great. We've had somebody we hired in May already run a search for us, and it really helps them feel like they're getting established in the organization. Some of the other things we did was we just shrank the number of people it required to come to a hiring decision. We shrank the committee size down to 3, and everybody else who's involved in the hiring process, it provides input into that process, but it's not a decision maker. It's really sped up the amount of time it takes to come to a hiring decision for us. So that's been a big refactoring that we've gone through this year. So great, you've got your team structure in place, you've got your second level of management in place, you've figured out how to streamline hiring, and now you've got to onboard all these people all at once. So we never really had an onboarding strategy. We just kind of, hey, Joe's starting on Monday, I'll spend some time with him, we'll figure out what he needs to do. That kind of didn't scale for us, and we started having some really mixed success with how well onboarding was going. So we just started with a simple idea of let's write up a written firsts plan, we called our first plan, which just means this is what your first day is going to look like, your first week, your first month, your first quarter. Sometimes we go out to the year. And I think the most important part of it is this is what you ought to be able to do at the end of those time periods. What that does, it does 2 things. So the supervisor of that person is forced to really think deeply about how I want this role to integrate into my team. And a lot that used to be taken for granted is now explicit, which is really nice. And 2, it gives the new hire something very tangible to say, you know, I'm invested in this team, this is what I'm going to be doing for this team in 3 short months or whatever it is. And it has a powerful psychological effect in guiding just like their momentum and focus on how they need to really establish themselves in the organization. So that's been a really useful, just simple thing that we started doing. And I will say that it's really more about the journey, not the destination, in that when we get to the end of it, what that person ended up doing looks nothing like what the plan actually says they were going to do. It's just the fact that we spent the time to talk about those things and be intentional about it that seemed to has had a really positive effect on our new hires. And they get up to speed much faster, they become leaders much faster, and they get really invested in the process very quickly. Just some specific tips. I don't know if you folks have formal onboarding plans or not, or strategies, but as we've been more intentional about it, we've realized that every one of our new hires has made a pretty significant real contribution to some long-standing problem we've had or piece of code that needed to be written within the first week, which kind of amazed me, given how complex and domain-specific our work is. But without fail, they've always, you'll see it in our ticketing tracking system, crossing off bugs or working out features in their first week. And so give them something big to bite on right away. And you'll probably think it's going to overwhelm them, and more often than not, they'll surprise you. And don't do the fire hose, big top-down orientation. Do like a 1-hour version of that, and then deep dive on something that they're gonna own as part of their job, and just let them go and run with it. And all that other stuff sort of figured itself out in time. That's been a really successful strategy for us, and it just makes onboarding a lot more fun and a lot easier, because your existing staff is not spending tons and tons of time getting people up to speed every week. Oh, here's another fun one. Performance evaluations. Nobody likes these. We didn't like them either, so we'd always put them off, and then in April, we'd all have to write our big reviews and do our big supervisor evaluations. And this April was a total disaster. Like, all feature development stopped for anything that depended on a supervisor because there was just so much more of it to do. So we refactored that as well. And nothing magic here, but it's just making sure that we're disciplined about taking the time to do this. The way we do it now is we sat down in May and/or when we're onboarding somebody throughout the year, and we established goals and responsibilities for them. So goals are like specific deliverables. You're going to do this for Project X and that for Project Y. Responsibilities are more like how we expect a developer 3 to act. Like you're going to write test suites for all of your code before it's considered finished, and you're going to document it and so on. But we established that up front, and then we have check-ins every quarter. What's great about the check-in is you sit down, you look at the goals, and you write a progress note. It takes like maybe an hour with each person if you really do a good, thorough job with it. But the real payoff comes in April when it's time to do the formal performance eval. And I don't know if you don't have formal performance evaluation requirements, that's great. I work at a huge university, so we do. But it's basically already written. You just kind of do the final summary, and it takes like just a very small amount of time. But the real benefit of it is that you're actually being intentional about letting people know whether they're on or off track throughout the year, right? And that's something that as you scale can easily fall by the wayside. And then you start having developers at the end of the year saying things like, I had no idea that was expected of me, or I had no idea that was the top priority. And this helps cut down all of that noise. Meetings. My abstract promised I'd talk to you about meetings, and so I'll talk to you about meetings a little bit. Meetings are just like process. So meetings aren't evil. It's just that bad meetings are evil, and most meetings are bad. So I don't have a magic bullet here, but there are some things that we've kind of tried to be careful about as we've gotten more and more meetings on our calendar. There's a simple question you can ask at the start of any meeting. Is the majority of the agenda of this meeting relevant to everybody in this room? And if it's not, tell the people it's not relevant to go back to work or go have a coffee or whatever they want to do, but you don't need to be in this room. We were having too many status meetings where it was the standard go around the room status meeting, and then there were 10 people in the room, and the manager was listening, and the person talking was speaking, and then there were 8 glazed over eyes, sets of eyes. We really just had to like stop the nonsense. This isn't helpful for anybody in the room to spend 45 minutes of an hour-long meeting hearing non-relevant information. So make sure that your status meetings are actually benefiting everybody in the room, and if not, just find some other way to do that. One-on-ones are tough. Does everybody who manages have regular one-on-ones with their staff, right? So these were turning into status meetings. And we got to a point where it was like, you're telling me what you're working on this week, but then you're going to still have to tell the rest of the team what you're working on this week, so why don't I just go to that meeting and we don't have to have this one-on-one, or at least this kind of one-on-one. One-on-one should be about all that meta stuff about people in workplaces and career development and things that might be happening in their life that makes it hard for them to focus on work and those kinds of conversations. And if you reduce that to a status meeting, it's really devaluing the purpose of the one-on-one. You have to be disciplined about not letting them turn into one-on-ones. And it's perfectly okay to say, we don't need to have a one-on-one this week. Everybody says you have to do it every week. That's total baloney. You don't have to do it every week unless you have something to talk about. Who has done the math of how much it costs an all-hands meeting at your organization for 1 hour? Really scary, right? Really scary. Starts getting up into the 4 figures very easily. For me to gather my team together, I haven't done the math quite yet, but I'm sure it's over $1,000. Okay, be really careful with the all-hands meeting. And also make sure that, I've told my team, if you're called to a meeting and there's no agenda, don't show up. Okay, some of the people holding those meetings got really mad at me for that. But I said, it's on you. It's not hard to put an agenda in the calendar invite. And so That quickly got worked out, but you know, you might take some heat. But I think that's a net win. Every meeting you have, somebody's not going to be able to be there, right? Bigger team, it's just the law of averages. So make sure you have a process for documenting. I don't mean you have to have like a court reporter in the corner of the room taking every word down, but somebody should leave the room knowing that I need to go back and write a few sentences about what happened in that meeting and what the deliverables are and put them somewhere where everybody knows to look. For us, it's often just hip chat. It doesn't have to be formal, but make sure somebody's doing that. We also have Focus Fridays where we have no meetings. That's been really, really helpful. Everybody knows they've got at least that one day a week where they can churn on code for the entire day. Quick note about communication. You know, communication is everything in the workplace. That's nothing new. But as you grow, there's all these assumptions about that people just know how to find out information that are no longer true. So define that for people. Like I said, if the meeting summaries are going to go in HipChat, just say, hey guys, when you're done your meeting, put your summaries in HipChat so people know where to go look, or a shared Google Drive, or whatever it is for you guys. But then be consistent with it. So I said, I'm not going to have all staff meetings just to tell you, like, you know, the admin core asked us to clean out the fridge again, right? I'm going to send a note at the end of each week with the administrivia in it. And then I did that for like 3 weeks, and then I forgot to do it for 2 weeks, and people got really mad at me because they said, you said you were going to do this, and you're not doing it. Be consistent about it. I mentioned HipChat. We use HipChat. If you're not using some sort of asynchronous group chat tool, hopefully one with history, you really need to start doing that. It's the single most valuable thing we've done in the last 2 years. And so hopefully, do people have that now? If you don't have that, go out and get it. I mean, I don't advocate a particular tool, just we use HipChat, but it costs me $2 a month for my developers. I would pay $20 a month per developer for that capability. It's just really, it's that important. Was there a question back there? Okay. Staff cohesion. So you're going to notice as you grow, you split into more teams, you're going to get less cohesive, just human nature. It's actually not a bad thing. You kind of want team-based culture, and team-based cohesion is probably more important than the all-staff cohesion. But at the same time, you do want to make sure that the organizational sort of values and priorities and agenda and strategy are being represented in each of those teams. So I phrase this as you want strategic cohesion, but tactical independence. Sort of sounds like I stole that from some military strategy book. I didn't, but probably a good place to go look for it. My job is to communicate the strategic priorities to the team leads. The team lead's job is to have, I want to empower my team leads to have the autonomy to go figure out the best way to execute on that plan and make sure that those values and that strategy stays represented as they're implementing the plan. So how do I do that? Well, you know, we started with core values. You know, we talk about our core values and making decisions with our core values in mind. That's a nice little sort of background filter to make sure that we're aligning with our strategy and with our values and with our vision whenever we're making a decision, however big or small. Standardizing processes, which is going to be the rest of this talk, has been a big role in making sure that we all kind of stay on the same page. Those cross-team committees, that's a great way to cross-pollinate culture and strategy and values. The group chat lobby, again, just one of the many benefits that we get of all staying on the same page. So that brings us to part 2 and the rest of the talk. This is about having tools that help you, as it says here, get better at knowing where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. And this is where this theme of balance comes back in. If you're going to go overboard when you're scaling your team, this is probably where you're going to do it. You're going to put in too much process, too many metrics, too much micromanagement. It's really easy to kind of make that mistake. Make sure you are asking whether or not this is an appropriate balance between, you know, sort of the individuals and the organizational agenda when you're talking about putting more process in place. I mean, it's unavoidable. You do need more process. You have to make sure that when you do it, it's lightweight, it's flexible, it's not overbearing. We'll talk about some of the ways that we came to navigate through those kinds of decisions. So we needed a better way to plan our work. And plan our work means a lot of different things. It means set strategy out 5 years, and it means what are we going to do in this sprint and everything in between. So I found it very useful to just sort of identify the different kinds of planning. I called them rhythms or cadences or cycles that we have. And pretty much everybody has some flavor of long-term planning, medium-term planning, and short-term planning. It's going to be different depending on your industry and the kind of work that you do. But the time horizons, span from years to days, and the focus and the objectives are very different for different kinds of planning, so you're going to need different approaches for different kinds of planning. So the MPC is kind of a weird place because we're all federally funded on generally 5-year grants, so I can tell you right now today everything I've got to do for the next 5 years. Most of the people in the room probably can't do that unless you also work in a research center like that. So the specifics might be different for you, but the concepts hopefully will translate. So for us, long-term planning is looking at all of our grants and making sure that, over these 5-year time horizon, we've got things chunked out into what we need to do this year. From that comes an annual roadmap. That's when we look at our budgets at a really deep level and do all those sorts of long-range things. We take an executive retreat and try to set themes for the next year. Our medium term is quarterly, and that's probably that's the linchpin of it all. Is the quarterly planning is when the researchers who are our customers work with IT to figure out what we're going to do in the next 3 months, and then we hand that plan to IT and say, it's up to you now to figure out how you want to decompose this and break it up and run with it. And that's sort of the transition between formal planning and then being less formal, being more agile. Some teams will then take that and do 2-week sprints. Some teams will take that and break it up to monthly releases. It leaves a lot of freedom for the teams, but we all start from a common point of quarterly planning. And the short-term planning is exactly what I just described. It's however the team has decided is the best way for them to decompose that quarter's worth of work and start implementing. Just some of the artifacts that come out of our planning process. This is just to give you ideas. This is that document. There's 350 lines in it when you look at the full thing of everything I'm obligated to do for the next 5 years. Now, we will win more grants, so I will be adding lines to this every year, but it's really nice to have that kind of certainty in one place. And we sit with the project managers, and we kind of put a very rough estimate of like small, medium, large, extra large, and some sort of color-coded algorithm on, yeah, we're on track for this, or, oh, we better get started working on this if we're going to hit our goal, okay? So that's the 30,000-foot view of the MPC. We produce a roadmap every year. We hang it in our cube walls. We talk about it in meetings. It's just a nice sort of visual representation of the same thing. When we get down into quarterly planning, it gets a little bit more interesting. So we keep a project cheat sheet on every one of our projects. It just has the key dates and the major initiatives that we're working on right now. Major being it's going to take 1 or more quarters to do it, not it's a bug that we're going to fix this week or things like that. We have one rule for the cheat sheet. It has to fit on one page. And what's great about the cheat sheet is when some researcher brings up some new initiative, you say, that doesn't seem to fit into any one of these buckets. Is it really that high of a priority? This is a great way of saying no without saying no. It's a nice upper Midwest passive-aggressive way to do it. In Redmine, which is our ticket tracking tool, we create a quarterly bucket as we're heading towards the quarter. So right now, all the Q4 buckets have been created. And research, our Q4 starts October 1. And our researchers have been dumping features into the Q4 buckets. And that's basically just a wish list. Doesn't mean we're actually going to do it, but it's a signal to us that we need to go put time estimates on it. And then we actually enter that into our quarterly process flow. We drew a little picture. So this is them building out their wish list. And then IT takes that wish list and says, okay, let's put estimates on it. Let's see how much developer availability we have. Let's see what the other projects are asking for in their wish lists. And the only way this works is if you get all your projects on the same quarterly cycle. That was a minor miracle for us, but we did it. And then we come back to the table and say, well, the holistic view is you're going to get 60% of your wish list or whatever, and we draw the line and we reprioritize. And it's taken a really long time to establish this as a habit, but now we're doing it regularly. And it's been really, really helpful. So now you have a quarterly plan, and it's up to the teams to figure out, Kanban, sprints, whatever, however they want to do it. But there is some convention even in that short-term planning, which is just because we're all using Redmine. Anything that comes up inside of a quarter, we want to make sure that the conversations happen about if we agree to do more stuff, what's going off the table? Where's the change management process? The way we captured it was very simple. Every project has a version in Redmine called incoming. Whenever a new idea comes up, whatever direction it comes from, it gets thrown into incoming and it gets triaged at whatever short-term meeting that team has. And that's allowed us to stay agile. People were worrying that all this new process was going to make us rigid and we're never going to be able to talk about what we want to work on outside of the quarterly planning. Totally not true. We just needed some assurance that when new things came in that they were going to be triaged appropriately and not just lead to massive scope creep, okay? So we drew another picture. And this is way more impressive looking than it really is. The message is really simple. New ideas come from lots of different directions, from email or from the coffee machine or from, so you go to a conference and they come back with a bunch of new ideas about what they want to try. All fine, all good. Take that, put it in incoming. Then you have a dedicated time and place to talk about those things without derailing whatever it was you were working on at the time. And you know that if you commit to something new, something old is going to go off the table, or at least there's going to be a conversation between all the stakeholders. And basically it's just, okay, to do the triage, can this wait till next quarter? Those are the easy ones. You bump it into the, we'll look at it next quarter bucket. But if not, just make sure the change management happens. That's all this box is saying, is just make sure we're being respectful of our commitments and our time and our plan. So it's not that the plan can't change, it's just that have a plan. So that's the planning side of it. And we now got everybody doing quarterly planning, and it's been really wonderful. Now there's the tracking side of it. You're actually working, how do you keep track of it? So I'm assuming everybody has an issue tracking system. Anybody not have one? That's your one takeaway. If you don't, you need one. Make this tool reflect and support what you do in real life. If it goes the other way and you start adapting your real life processes to fit your ticketing system, that's when everybody hates the ticketing system. So we did a ton of work to say, how do I make Redmine support the conversations that we're already having in real life? And then make that as consistent as possible for every project in every area of the org. So for us, literally a developer 3 years ago installed Redmine on a VM and said, here's a cool new tracking tool, we should try it out. Three years later, that was our system of record. And there was never any plan or thought put into the actual configuration of it or really what it should do. So that led to all sorts of craziness. Researchers just reorganizing our versions 2 days away from deployment and release and all sorts of craziness. So we knew we had to refactor that. We had some goals for that process. Again, we wanted to support what we're doing in real life, not dictate it. This idea of researchers' responsibility, their responsibility is to tell us what needs to be done and in what order. And IT's responsibility is to figure out how to do it and separate those roles in Redmine. And same thing, separate management decisions from the things that individual contributors care about. And probably foremost, make sure this tool is generating the data we need for that data-driven decision making. And everybody wanted it to be as simple as humanly possible as long as it still met all these goals that we had set out. So we established a Redmine committee. We had representation from all sort of spans and depths of the team, brand new hires to myself and everything in between. And we cataloged every usage pattern we could find within Redmine. We went and interviewed a bunch of people, and we kind of figured out the full corpus of how is this thing being used at the MPC. Then we developed a set of standards and recommendations and slowly implemented them over the summer. I'm not going to tell you about it. It was a pretty thick document, but just some of the outcomes. We boiled everything down to just 4 roles. You're a developer, you're an IT lead, you're a researcher, or you're a research manager, and everything fell into one of those buckets. That was really clarifying for us. We have a couple different issue types. We have features, and that's researchers author the features. Please go build this thing for us. It's one of our grant deliverables or whatever it might be. And IT authors the tasks. Okay, this is how we're going to make that happen. This is the technology we're going to bring to bear to satisfy that feature. So when we do long and medium range planning, quarterly planning, it's all around features for the most part. I mean, there's exceptions, but for the most part, it's a nice clean separation. We talk about features, we get a set of features for the quarterly plan, and then that quarter is spent decomposing those features into tasks and knocking them out, and that's all internal to IT. I showed you one of those special buckets that we use, incoming. Every project gets an incoming bucket. Every project gets an investigating bucket, which just means somebody is in charge of looking into this ticket before we figure out where it ultimately lands. On deck is all that stuff we're not going to worry about this quarter, which is nice. We can just, it's out of the way, except for when quarterly planning is happening. And dugout is just where things go that we don't want to die. We'd like to at least have a place to file those away and maybe come back to them someday. There's some other things we did. I don't need to go into all of this, but just the idea is make sure it's supporting what you want to do in the real world and the kinds of relationships and communication channels and division of responsibilities you have in real life. Don't just use it out of the box. It takes a ton of customization for it to be effective in your workplace. The last major topic I'll talk about is time tracking, probably the most sensitive or controversial one. Historically, we did no time tracking. It was very easy. Hired somebody, put them on a project, paid them 100% from that project, that's where their effort went. The moment we broke that model and devs started working across projects, across funding sources, all of a sudden we had a real need to figure out where that effort was going. No developer, universal truth, I think. Anybody love time tracking? Yeah, nobody loves time tracking. So nobody wanted, there's a lot of groans when I brought this topic up, but I really needed a way to have data to support not only making sure the money was being used appropriately, but just understanding that a project has this much demand and is paying this much. How do I know it has this much demand unless I'm tracking it at least some quantitative level? I didn't want crazy detail. I wanted sort of this top one. I spent an hour on a bug, 2 hours coding with Joe. I had a one-on-one with my supervisor. Every developer automatically assumed what I was asking for was, I spent 17 minutes doing email, and then Doug came over for 6 minutes, and I got the half joking, are we going to have a category called bathroom in Redmine? And that's where people's minds go. And so I had to be very explicit about the anti-goals of time tracking. This one I think is non-negotiable unless you absolutely have an organization that's hell-bent on doing this. Just come out and say, we are not going to use time tracking data for performance evaluations. Okay, that will take the stress level way, way down. And the other thing I said was, we're not trying to hit 100%. I don't care about the fine-grained detail of all that overhead time that I know is in there. I want the good enough. I want the 60, 70, whatever it turns out to be, because I can get a whole lot of business intelligence out of that while not totally micromanaging my devs. So we track it within Redmine. Everybody's using Redmine every day, so it's nice, it's right there. For all that administrative overhead, we literally have buckets like meetings. There's a bucket called meetings, and you put time in it. And there's a bucket called vacation and sick time, and you just file hours into it. You don't have to do like instance-based filing. If you're working on a search and hiring process, you're meeting with a candidate, that just all goes into a shared bucket. So I can say, yes, as a team, we're spending 15% of our time on hiring. That's good enough. That's what I want to know. And it's easy to get that data without having to be so explicit about it. Our design goal was 5 minutes for time tracking. It should take you 5 minutes. And so if it's taking longer than that, we have to refactor. So our rules are 30-minute granularity. If it's 60, that's totally fine. I secretly had the goal of 75% of hours captured. I never actually published that, but I knew from past experience that was within reach from doing this at other places. We did look at the data, and we figured out that if you log your time daily, you end up doing a better job of logging your time. And so that's the one thing we said, please just log it daily. Don't wait till the end of the week and try to figure out what you did all week. So expect resistance if you have to start doing time tracking. Expect to work hard for the buy-in. Expect to send a lot of reminders before it becomes habit forming. To keep the controversy down, just keep it very we-focused. We need to do a better job of time tracking, or we're falling off a little bit here. Don't point out winners and losers. Of course, the data is there if you want to do that, but don't do that. The most important thing, show the team the value you're getting from this new data, this new thing that you've asked them to do. So I have a couple slides at the end that'll show that. Just some logistical things. Make sure you track vacation and sick time. It sounds like overhead, but it actually throws off all your numbers if you don't. If it's taking more than 5 minutes a day, refactor. And for me, the biggest thing is keep my calendar up to date. When I look at my calendar at the end of the day, not only do I see my meeting time, but I remember it triggers what I did in between all those meetings. So it really is, even for me, 5 minutes time tracking. Super simple at the end of the day. Last two slides before I wrap. This is a graph of our performance on time tracking the first half of the year. Those are weeks on the bottom and how much of our theoretical max hours we captured, where theoretical max is a 40-hour work week. We actually are doing, so you can see we're definitely hitting 70, 75% most weeks. One week we even hit 90. We're doing really, really well with it. 5 minutes a day. And I can do this kind of insight, which is really awesome. So this is one of our quarters earlier in the year. This is where the effort went across 20 or however many projects those are. I mean, my executive management just eats this up. And to be able to get this, asking people to do something 5 minutes a day is really awesome. So that's kind of a lightning fast tour of some of the issues we hit, some of the aspects we had to refactor, some of the tools and techniques we put in place as we've basically doubled in size this year. I hope that everybody in the room got something they can take back to their organization. I'll finish with a progress report. Most important, we're getting a lot of work done, and everybody's still having fun. We don't have miserable developers, so that's great. We have a much better self-awareness of what we're capable of and what we're not capable of doing. So it is easier to say no now and be evidence-based about that. It's also easier to say yes and feel like not panicked about that. We have a much stronger partnership with our customers. It's just really awesome to have these kinds of open conversations with our customers about the necessity of these processes and the kinds of business intelligence and other benefits that we're getting from it. And then finally, I feel much better about the bus factor. If I get hit by a bus, I hope people will miss me for a little bit. But the MPC is in it great. We've cultivated a whole new generation of IT leadership. We've really spread the load. People are finding new opportunities for career growth. It's really exciting. Individual contributors becoming supervisors and really loving it and really embracing it. Trust has been just sort of internalized as a core principle, this trust and delegate model that we now have. So that's where we are. I'm hoping next year this will be my talk. Tackling your grand challenges, how to stop kicking the can down the road. We've had a number of things on our plate for years and years that we just felt totally unprepared to tackle. Like, how are we ever even going to get our team, breathing room to tackle these things? And we actually feel now that several of those we're going to knock off in 2015. It's really exciting and motivating for the team. So I hope I can come talk about that next fall. And that's about it. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, this will be the time. And at the bottom, again, my contact info. And one last thing, one of the fun things we've been doing is putting together an IT tech blog, and we're going to launch it. I hope to have it launched today, but it's not quite there. But if you're really interested in sort of the kinds of work I described and the technologies we play with, that would be a great URL to keep your eye on. All right, thank you. Any questions?
Can you talk a little bit about the goals, the quarterly goals? What's your approach for how you establish them? Are they measurable goals? Are they career growth goals? What's your approach?
So the goals for our, for any given quarter are really dependent on what a project, a lot of it comes straight out of what the grant says the project's going to do, because there is a timeline associated with that. So some of it's very sort of logistical. But that's for the team, right. So then on top of that, you layer with the individual, when you're doing like the performance evaluation and goals, everyone starts the year with, like, for instance, a professional development. Sometimes it's specifics, like I want to go to Surge, but sometimes it's just more like I want to cultivate my management skill set, or I want to work on whatever it is, some skill set they want. And we're explicit about that in the goals, and then every quarter you're getting a progress note written on that. And what it usually does is the first quarter and the second quarter you kind of forget about it, and then you start realizing you're getting towards the end of the year. And because it's there and because you're talking about it, people will go and schedule training or put time aside to read through some books and try some tutorials. It really forces the issue. I don't know that we have a standard strategy. We really, for performance evaluation, we want it to be mainly driven by, if the individual is satisfying the project goals, then above and beyond that, it's really driven by them and where they want to take their career and where we can see opportunities for them. So, I don't know that there's a template for that. We can talk more offline if you want specifics. Any other questions?
Thanks. That's great.
Thank you.